Hello again, and a warm welcome to you. We journeyed together in this winter series, and this is our fifth of presentations. Father Tom and I are delighted, privileged to be with you in this prayerful way. The theme for this conference today is going to be on integrity, and I've subtitled it, The Content of Character. And I'd like to begin with a narrative. The scenario is December 1st, 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. A 42-year-old seamstress, an African-American woman, does a daring and actually revolutionary thing. She remains seated on a crowded public bus. Within just a few moments, the enraged bus driver had summoned the police. The woman was arrested, then handcuffed, fingerprinted, and jailed. Well, many years later, a young graduate student from New York University, while working on his doctoral dissertation, was granted an interview with Rosa Parks, was the woman's name. And one of the first questions he asked her was, "Why did you sit down that day in Montgomery?" And I love Rosa Parks' response. She said, "I sat down because I was tired, but it wasn't my feet. My soul was tired. And I was slowly coming to realize that no punishment anyone else could inflict upon me could be more painful than the punishment I was inflicting upon myself by trying to live a double life. I was watching the slow erosion of my own authenticity, my own integrity." The subtitle of this reflection on integrity comes from a very familiar speech of Dr. Martin Luther King shortly before his death in Washington, D.C. he was, and it was entitled, "I Have a Dream." And one of the phrases in that profound and provocative narrative was when Dr. King said, "I dream of a time when my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." I first got the idea on giving a reflection on integrity from a series of humorous home videos, actually, that parents had taken of their little toddler children caught in the very act of mischief or carelessness or disobedience even. You know, the Crayola drawings all over the lower panels of the kitchen wall, and a child with a Crayola in hand blaming the dog for the disturbance, or a big gouge hollowed out of the side of a chocolate cake, and a 3-year-old with frosting all over his face emphatically denies culpability. Well, little ones' deceit can be humorous and cute, but as we mature, not so much. You know, in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, he speaks of the poor in spirit, or the meek, or the merciful. And then he says, "Blessed are the clean of heart, they will see God." It implies an undividedness in following God's dream, God's rules. You know, the word integer, the Latin, actually means whole. It's in mathematics, of course, an integer is not a fraction. It's Joseph Goldberger, a very famous author back many years ago when I was in college, wrote a book everybody read. It was called Holiness is Wholeness. And we come to realize that to be holy, we have to be integrated. We have to be authentic. Holiness is wholeness. And so in my reflections today, I'm going to be relying a lot on Joseph Goldberger and people like Pope Francis and some of his writings, Stephen Carter, a wonderful law professor at Harvard University who wrote a book entitled Integrity, and David Brooks, who a couple of years ago wrote a book, The Road to Character. Time and time again, these authors keep reminding us of the need, the necessity for character, for integrity, for us to be a healthy society. And so as kind of an outline or a template for my reflections, I'd like to define what integrity means today. Secondly, I'd like to look at the reality of truth in the gospel. And finally, how our rich tradition can continue to unfold and we can reclaim it. To understand what integrity means today, I go back to Stephen Carter, this wonderful African-American teacher at Harvard. He was giving a commencement address, he says, not too long ago, a graduating class, and he told them that the theme for his reflection in the talk was going to be integrity. And he said spontaneously, the entire area just erupted in applause. He said, it surprised me. I lost a sense of bearings, but people are so starving for this experience of integrity that we've got to ponder this a little bit. I question, why do we care more today about winning than playing by the rules? Or why time and time again do the news reports offer us stories of prominent Hollywood actors or actresses willing to cheat their way through their daughter's SAT scores to get their kid into an Ivy League school? Why do car manufacturers devise software intentionally to misread CO2 emission commissions, misleading the Environmental Protection Agency? We could go on with example after example, but I've been pondering lately a lot on our call as Christians, our vocation. Whenever I preside at a wedding, I like to acknowledge before the congregation that I don't have the grace of matrimony, obviously. Nevertheless, I boldly proclaim to the couple before me that as they exchange vows, I tell them the person sitting next to you right now is the person with whom you will work out your salvation. Now, of course, redemption is always God's work, but your spirit, I tell them, is schooled in wedlock. Your institution of learning will be your household. The spirit of transformation that God wishes to effect in you will transpire within the crucible of relationship with your spouse and your kids. That's how we are redeemed. I must confess, I used to think bachelor parties were outrageous, just excuses to revel in bawdy and vulgar behavior the night before your wedding. But I think in some ways a bachelor party acknowledges in a profound ritual a way of life, a life full of unlimited choices, and the wild range of human experience will now be renunciated. Maybe we need that ritual. As I listen to young people, those who are not embracing the sacrament of marriage, I believe that for some, the fear of commitment is grounded in the recognition that the breadth of human experience may no longer be available to them. This is much, much more than just, confining your Saturday night to one person. Perhaps it's the young lawyer who realizes that she'll never be a partner in the firm now. Not because she doesn't have the skill set or the ambition or the discipline, but merely because she's made a choice for her children, her spouse, not to do a 60-hour week work. We call that in philosophy a crisis of limits. Not in the sense of a tragedy or calamity, but crisis in its etymological roots. It means a cross or a crossroads, an important decision-making time. And I think for a lot of us, for better or for worse, we're at a turning point in culture now. The crisis of limitation might be the reason why we feel winning is more important than following the rules, and we're willing to sacrifice integrity for it. Secondly, I'd like to speak of truth. Ron Rolheiser is a wonderful priest in San Antonio. He's written several books on spirituality. And recently he wrote an article, Playing Loose with the Truth. He says studies from major scientific institutes are now just dismissed as another opinion, with results that are creating an entire society within which it's becoming more and more difficult for any of us to trust what's a fact and what isn't. That's dangerous territory, Rolheiser says, not just politically, but spiritually. And he goes on. Remember when Jesus says in the gospel, every sin will be forgiven except the sin against the Spirit. We're reminded that Satan is the prince of lies. And Rolheiser says, be careful about what you're doing just now, putting a false spin on something, just because it's too awkward or uncomfortable to accept as true. The danger is that if you continue to do this, you may eventually come to believe your own lie. This will be unforgivable, not because God cannot forgive, but simply because you can't see the truth and you have no need for forgiveness. The sin can't be forgiven, not because God doesn't want to forgive it, but because we no longer want to be forgiven. In the 16th chapter of John's Gospel, the final discourse of Jesus, he tells his disciples, I have much more to tell you now, but you can't bear it. When the Spirit comes, however, being the Spirit of truth, he will guide you to all truth. Today, there are two extremes, I think, for us Catholics especially, that characterize our discourse, or our lack of discourse. Some members of the church who package truth as certitude. No room for gray area at all. And they bludgeon others with an uncompromising or inflexible dictate. Secondly, some of those in the political realm with whom we testify with no truth whatever. And they repeatedly contradict themselves, accusing others of offenses without providing verification or any evidence. As a result, I think sometimes we're caught between the rock of fundamentalism and the hard place of relativism. We've got to go deeper. We've got to work together to discern truth. I was reading an article the other day by Rex Tillerson, a great engineer and energy executive for many years with Exxon, and then, of course, as Secretary of State back in 2018. He gave a commencement address to the students of Virginia Tech back in 2018, urging the graduates to confront a crisis of integrity and ethics in our culture, warning them to carefully consider the values and culture of the organization they're about to work in. If our leaders, Tillerson said, seek to conceal the truth, or we as a people become accepting of alternative realities that are no longer grounded in facts, then as American citizens, we're on the pathway to relinquishing our freedom. A growing crisis in ethics and integrity, Tillerson said. If we the people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on democracy. He asked Americans to preserve and protect our freedom by recognizing what truth is and is not, what is a fact and what is not, and to demand any pursuit of America's future be fact-based, not based on wishful thinking, not our hoped-for outcome, and not our shallow promises. If we as Americans confront the crisis of integrity in our society today, and among leaders both in the public and private sector, we will succeed. Finally, Jesus says, if you remain in my word, you will truly be my disciples. You'll get to know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Shepard Smith, a news commentator, a journalist, broadcast journalist from Fox News, recently said, we need to separate news from opinion. If you're going to opine all you like, all day, but make sure you're grounded in truth and opine from there. It's the deviation from truth that causes the greatest concern. Smith says, it is injurious to society, and it's the antithesis of what we should be doing. Those of us who are so honored and grateful to have the platform or influence must use it for the public good. I conclude with how we reclaim our tradition of integrity. You've heard me say before, my antidote to discouragement or anxiety or depression is always to immerse myself in the communion of the saints. Sometimes that means reading biographies of literally the lives of saints, the biographies of those canonized ones in our history, our tradition. Sometimes it's just sharing a meal with someone we love and honor and respect. So if you feel sometimes that you're swimming in a sea of corruption and disinformation and deceit, it might be good to rub elbows with the holy. Paul Swanson from the Center for Action and Contemplation is a young dad and father of 2 little ones. Some time ago, he was making his way through an airport with his 2 little toddlers, anxious with security, he said, and you can't let your eyes off of either child even for a moment. And finally, we got to the bus that was to take us to the terminal. And buses and little children are very difficult to navigate together. But the young lady driving the bus asked the names of his 2 kids. By the time we were seated, she was singing a song over the speaker, weaving the children's names into her lyrics and melody. The kids were enthralled, delighted, totally engaged. You know, the philosopher and poet Wendell Berry says, as he speaks of artificial intelligence, it's work without love. Well, this was work, but woven with love, the fabric of our tradition. It's how we reclaim integrity. And I slowly came to recognize that no punishment that anyone could inflict upon me could be more painful than the one I was inflicting upon myself. I was losing my integrity. Our prayers are with you, and God bless you.